The shelter was unusually quiet that afternoon, filled only with the soft hum of fans and the gentle squeaks of toys being shuffled around. Officer Daniel Hayes stopped by during his routine welfare check, smiling as he watched the resident pups wag and twirl in their kennels. But one little shelter puppy, a tiny golden mix named Milo, wasn't playing like the others. Instead, Milo gently picked up a small stuffed duck in his mouth and trotted toward the front desk, placing it carefully where visitors usually stood. Daniel chuckled at first, thinking it was just adorable puppy behavior. But then Milo brought another toy. And another. And another. The shelter staff had seen it before. Milo brought toys to every single visitor, as if offering a gift, hoping someone would finally choose him. Daniel felt a soft tug in his chest as he watched the hopeful pup trot back and forth, tail wagging but eyes carrying a quiet longing. Then the dog suddenly froze. His ears perked. His tail lowered just slightly. Milo stared intensely at the entrance door, body trembling with an emotion Daniel couldn't quite understand. Daniel followed the puppy's gaze, sensing the sudden shift in the room. Milo gently picked up his favorite toy, the stuffed duck, and placed it directly by the door, then sat beside it, waiting with an odd stillness. Moments later, the shelter door opened, and a small child stepped inside. But what Milo sensed was far from ordinary. Before we continue, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-touching dog stories. And tell me, where are you watching from? The shelter always had a certain softness in the afternoons. Light filtered through the high windows in long warm stripes. Dust moved slowly in the beams, drifting like tiny floating sparks. Fans hummed overhead. Kennels rustled with quiet movement. A shuffle here, a tail thump there. Nothing loud, nothing urgent. Officer Daniel Hayes stepped inside like he did every Tuesday. Calm, steady, carrying the familiar scent of warm pavement and the faintest trace of coffee. He nodded to the receptionist, lifted a hand in greeting to a volunteer, then walked the narrow aisle between kennels. This place always settled something inside him. A small breath, a small pause, a reminder that not every part of life had to move quickly. The dogs noticed him right away. A few stood, a few wagged. Some stayed curled up, blinking sleepily. And then there was Milo, a tiny golden pup with ears just a bit too big for his head. Soft eyes. A tail that wagged so fast it looked like a blur behind him. Milo stood over a scattered assortment of toys, stuffed ducks, rubber bones, a squeaky blue star. He sniffed them carefully, selecting one with the seriousness of a pup facing destiny. Then, with the toy gently in his mouth, he trotted toward the front desk. Daniel smiled. He had seen Milo perform this ritual many times. Visitors came in, and no matter who they were, the puppy always brought them something. A gift. An offering. A hopeful little gesture that said, "Please see me." Daniel leaned against the counter watching. Milo placed the toy, today it was the squeaky blue star, directly in the center of the welcome mat. Then he sat, tail sweeping the floor in slow arcs, eyes fixed on the door. "Still doing his thing, huh?" Daniel murmured. The receptionist, Jenny, chuckled softly. "He's convinced it's his job," she said. "Every visitor gets a toy. Sometimes two." Daniel nodded. "It's sweet," he said quietly. "Kid's got a soft heart." Milo perked up at the sound of Daniel's voice. A small bounce. A quiet woof. Then he went right back to arranging the toy, nudging it a little closer to the door with his nose. And for a while, everything was peaceful. Daniel walked the aisles, checking on the dogs, taking notes for his welfare report. Nothing unusual. Just the soft sounds of paws and the lovely calm that lived in this place when the world outside felt loud. Then something shifted. A tiny sound at first. Barely a sound at all. More like a tension in the air. A pause in Milo's breathing. Daniel caught it only because he had learned to watch animals the way some people watched clocks. Carefully and with curiosity. Milo stood very still, frozen mid-step, ears alert, body long and focused like he'd suddenly heard something no one else could. Daniel stopped walking. He listened. Nothing. Just the fans. Just the rustling of dogs turning in their beds. He walked slowly back toward the front. "Milo?" he murmured. The pup didn't move, didn't wag, didn't blink much either. He simply stared at the entrance. Jenny noticed it too. "Oh," she whispered. "He only does that when..." But she didn't finish, because Milo moved again, this time with purpose. He picked up the stuffed duck, the toy he always kept for last, the one he slept with, the one he never offered unless something felt different. The little yellow duck dangled from his mouth as he approached the entrance, each step slow, careful, almost ceremonial. He lowered the toy gently onto the floor, right in front of the door, not an inch to the left or right. Then he sat, perfectly still, perfectly focused. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name. He walked closer, crouched beside the pup. "Milo, buddy, what is it?" The puppy exhaled softly. A small tremble moved through his body, not fear, not excitement, something quieter, something deeper, instinctive. Daniel listened again. He stopped, listened, waited. The shelter's front door made a tiny click, the sound of hinges shifting as someone pushed from the other side. Milo's ears lifted, tail lowered, body leaned forward but didn't leave the ground. The door opened. A soft chime sounded overhead, and a small child stepped inside. A girl no older than 7, holding her mother's hand, shoulders drawn in, eyes lowered, her presence small but heavy, like she carried something silent with her. Daniel felt Milo move before he saw it. A quiet intake of breath, a tiny shuffle. The pup leaned forward as though pulled by a string only he could feel. Jenny whispered, "He's never reacted like this." Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too busy watching the way Milo stared at the girl. Not excited, not fearful, but with a kind of recognition, as if he'd been waiting, as if something inside him simply knew. The girl lifted her eyes for a moment, just a flicker, just enough for Daniel to see the sadness behind them, and just enough for Milo to stand, take one tiny step, and then sit again like he didn't want to frighten her. Daniel felt a shiver move down his spine. Not fear, not worry, just the strange, quiet certainty that whatever was happening in front of him mattered deeply. He exhaled slowly. "Milo," he whispered. But the puppy didn't look away from the girl, not even for a heartbeat. The child stepped fully inside, still holding her mother's hand, still quiet, still distant. And Milo waited, perfectly still beside his favorite toy, waiting for her, waiting for something Daniel didn't yet understand, something the dog had sensed long before anyone else, something far from ordinary. The little girl stood just inside the doorway, half hidden behind her mother's arm. Soft shoes, loose hair, eyes lowered to the floor as though the world felt too heavy to look at directly. The shelter stayed quiet around her, not by rule, just by instinct. Even the dog seemed to sense the fragile air she carried. Milo didn't move. He didn't wag or bark. He simply stayed seated beside his stuffed duck, holding himself still in a way that didn't belong to a bouncy puppy his age. Daniel watched them both. The girl small, silent, folded inward. The pup, alert, patient, strangely steady. The mother bent slightly, whispering, "Sweetheart, remember we're just visiting. You don't have to talk. Just look. That's all." The girl didn't respond. Not even a nod. Her hand held her mother's fingers the way a child might hold a lifeline. Daniel stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Welcome. If you need anything, just let us know." The mother nodded politely. "Thank you. We're just trying to help her feel comfortable again." Her voice wavered at the end. Not dramatically, just a small tremble. The kind that slips through when someone has been carrying worry for far too long. Daniel's eyes softened. He kept his voice calm, warm. "Take your time. No rush." And then, Milo made his move. Slow, measured, one step at a time. His paws barely touched the floor. His body low, not submissive, just gentle. He picked up the stuffed duck again, held it loosely in his mouth, then walked halfway toward the girl, and stopped. He placed the toy on the floor, backed up a couple of inches. Saturday, the girl noticed. Not fully, not with her whole body, but with the smallest flicker in her eyes. A shift. A soft inhale. Her mother saw it too. "Oh," she whispered. "That's new." Daniel stayed quiet, giving the moment space. Milo nudged the duck slightly with his nose, not pushing it toward her, just adjusting it, as if saying, "It's okay. You can take your time. I'm here." The girl's fingers loosened around her mother's hand, just a little, just enough for the mother to look down in surprise. "It's all right," she said softly. "You can look if you want." Slowly, the girl raised her head. Her eyes lifted just enough to meet Milo's. And that was when Daniel felt it again. The same inward jolt, the same unspoken recognition he'd seen in the pup earlier. Milo didn't look excited, didn't tilt his head like a curious puppy. He held himself still and open, like he understood something tender and delicate in front of him. The girl stared at the duck. Her breath hitched. Barely noticeable, but Daniel heard it. A memory maybe. A shadow of something painful. Her mother knelt beside her. "You don't have to touch him," she whispered. "Just look. That's all." The girl blinked slowly, held the breath in her chest for a moment, let it out in a tiny controlled release. Then she took one small step forward. Milo's posture softened. His ears lowered slightly. His tail moved once-twice in a slow, gentle sweep. Not wanting to scare her. Not wanting to overwhelm her. Daniel knelt too, keeping his body language open. He spoke quietly to the mother. "She seems careful. Sensitive." The woman nodded. "She hasn't spoken in months." Daniel felt the weight of that sentence settle in the space between them. "She used to be very chatty," the mother continued softly. "Always talking. Always laughing. But after, well," her voice faded. She shook her head. "It's been hard." Daniel didn't push. Didn't ask for details. He let her speak when she was ready. The girl took another step. Tiny. Quiet. Barely more than a shift of balance. Milo lowered his head to the duck. Placed a soft paw on it. Then removed it again. Almost as if demonstrating that the toy was safe. Untouched, waiting for her. Daniel whispered. "That's a smart little guy you've got there." The receptionist, Jenny, nodded from behind her desk. "He doesn't do this with everyone." The girl's mother exhaled shakily. "I can see that." Another step. The girl was now close enough that Milo could have touched her if he reached out his nose. But he didn't. He held still. Space. Patience. Understanding. Her fingers twitched at her side. She opened her hand. Closed it again. Opened it once more. Then very slowly she reached out. Not to touch Milo. To touch the duck. Her fingertips brushed the soft fabric. Just a graze. A moment. A whisper of contact. Milo responded with the gentlest whine. Barely audible. A warm sound. A hopeful sound. The girl froze. Breath caught. Eyes wide. Milo lowered his head and nudged the duck closer. Just a few inches. The girl's throat moved as she swallowed. Her hand stayed suspended in the air. Hovering. Waiting. Her mother whispered. "It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe." Daniel felt his own breath slow. The whole room felt suspended. Then the girl did something none of them expected. She sat down. Right there on the floor. Cross-legged. Silent. But present. Her mother gasped softly. Daniel felt emotion rise in his chest. Milo immediately relaxed. His tail thumped quietly. He inched closer, one tiny shuffle at a time. The girl didn't pull away. Didn't shrink back. She just watched him. Her eyes softened. Her shoulders dropped the tiniest bit. A breath. A release. And in that quiet moment, that soft, fragile pocket of time, Daniel understood exactly what Milo had sensed the second she walked through the door. Pain. Loneliness. A missing piece. Something broke in the girl months ago. And this little shelter pup, with his oversized ears and stuffed duck, was reaching straight for the broken part. Not with excitement. Not with noise, but with quiet, unwavering presence. The kind of presence children trust before they even understand why. The mother whispered, tears gathering at the edges of her eyes. She hasn't gone near a dog since everything happened. Daniel placed a hand over his heart without realizing it. Because Milo wasn't just approaching a child. He was approaching a wound. And somehow, someway he knew exactly how to do it. The girl sat on the shelter floor, legs crossed, hands resting lightly in her lap. Still silent. Still fragile. But present, and that alone felt like a quiet miracle. Milo edged closer by inches. Not bold. Not eager. Just sure. As if he'd practiced this kind of gentleness his whole life. Daniel stayed a few steps back, giving space, watching the scene unfold like something delicate enough to break with a careless breath. The mother knelt behind her daughter, hands resting lightly on her shoulders. Her eyes followed Milo's every move. Not fearfully but with a cautious, trembling hope. The girl lifted her hand again. Hesitant. Hovering. Not for Milo, not yet, but toward the duck. She touched it more firmly this time, resting her small palm on the soft yellow fabric. Milo watched her hand. His tail moved once, a slow sweeping motion across the floor. He leaned forward. Stopped. Looked up at her face before making the final decision. Then he pushed the duck fully into her lap. The girl gasped. A tiny sound barely audible. Her fingers clenched around the toy. Not in fear. Not in startle. But in something Daniel recognized instantly. Recognition. Memory. Something important stirring inside her. Her mother's breath caught. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. But the girl didn't look away from Milo. The pup gave a small encouraging woof. His ears lowered gently. His body softened. A signal that he meant no pressure, no demand, just presence. Then he did the thing that surprised everyone. He walked back to the toy bin. Daniel straightened slightly. Oh boy, what's he doing now? Milo nosed through the basket until he found something else. A small red rope toy. He picked it up, carried it back, plopped it gently beside the girl's knee. Then he returned to the bin. Again. And again. A stuffed bone. A squeaky frog. A tennis ball too big for his mouth. One by one, Milo created a little pile in front of the girl. An offering. Not frantic. Not playful. Intentional. Daniel let out a slow breath. That's not random. He's choosing for her. Jenny, standing behind the counter, covered her mouth. He's never done that much for one person. The mother's voice trembled. I don't understand, why her? Daniel didn't answer yet. His gaze stayed on Milo, who now sat in front of the girl again, surrounded by toys he had gathered like treasures. Then the girl did something new. She reached out. Not for the toys but for Milo. Her hand hovered above his head. Hesitant. Uncertain. Milo looked up. Eyes soft. Still. He leaned in very slightly, just enough to meet her halfway. Her fingers touched his fur. Barely. Just the tips. She froze again. But Milo didn't. He stayed exactly where he was, breathing slow and steady, grounding her without a single sound. The mother let out a sob. Quiet, broken, hopeful. Daniel swallowed hard. He forced his voice low, steady. Let her go at her pace. Milo seems to know exactly what she needs. The girl's touch grew a little firmer. Her hand slid gently from his head to his ear, tracing the soft velvety curve. Milo leaned into it. Not too much. Not too little. Just enough. And when he wagged his tail, slow, rhythmic, comforting, something in the girl's posture eased. Her shoulders loosened. Her breath steadied. Her mother whispered, "Sweetheart, you're doing so well." But the girl didn't respond. Not with words. Not yet. Instead, she picked up one of the toys Milo brought, the squeaky frog, and placed it gently between them. A gesture Daniel recognized. A small offering back. Milo sniffed it, then looked up at her with a soft chuff of approval. The girl blinked rapidly, eyes shining with something unreadable. Sadness, relief, memory. Maybe all three woven together. Daniel crouched down slowly, speaking softly to the mother. He's connecting with her in a way most dogs don't. This is instinct, but it's something else too. The mother wiped her cheeks. It's like he knows she's hurting. Daniel nodded. Some dogs, they can feel it. They can find the person who needs them most. The girl slid the frog toy a few inches closer to Milo. He accepted it, lifting it into his mouth, giving it one tiny squeak that made her jump, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she reached for the duck again, held it closer to her chest. Milo watched her carefully. Then he did something softly astonishing. He stepped forward and rested his chin lightly on her knee. The girl froze. Her breath caught. Her fingers curled around the duck in a tight, trembling grip. Daniel felt the emotion hit him like a slow wave. Because the moment wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't anything most people would notice at first glance. But it was real. Raw. A child letting a dog into the quietest, most wounded part of her heart. The mother whispered, voice breaking. She hasn't let anyone, not even me, this close in months. Milo closed his eyes, exhaling a soft little huff as though saying, I've got you. It's okay. You're not alone anymore. The girl's hand rose again. Slow, hesitant, heavy with meaning. And this time she placed it fully on Milo's head. Not just fingertips. Not a graze. A full gentle touch. Her first real contact with a dog since her world fell apart. Daniel lowered his gaze, letting the moment breathe, letting it settle. Because he knew without question, this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. A quiet opening. The first crack of light in a long hallway of shadows. A bond had begun. Soft, steady, unshakable. Forged not by excitement, but by the persistence of a tiny shelter pup who refused to give up on a girl who couldn't speak. Not yet. The officer carried the exhausted dog into his home, as if lifting something precious and breakable. The moment they stepped inside, warmth wrapped around them, the soft glow of the living room lamp, the faint smell of coffee, the quiet hum of a heater fighting the cold night. The dog hesitated at the doorway, paws trembling on the wooden floor, unsure if this was another temporary stop or something safer. The officer noticed and knelt beside him. It's all right, he murmured, giving a slow, reassuring pat. This is your home now. The dog took a cautious step, then another, sniffing the air with wide, unsure eyes. Every tiny sound, the creak of the sofa, the ticking of the wall clock, made his body flinch. The officer moved slowly, giving him space but staying close enough to be a steady presence. He laid a soft blanket on the floor and placed a bowl of fresh water beside it. When he stepped back, the dog lowered himself onto the blanket with a deep, shaky sigh, as though releasing months of wandering in a single breath. Later that night, when the officer turned off the lights and headed to his bedroom, he heard gentle footsteps behind him. The dog was standing in the hallway, ears low, eyes pleading, not wanting to be alone. The officer felt his heart tug. All right, come on, he whispered, lifting the blanket and placing it near his bed. The dog circled once, curled up, and finally closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he slept without fear. When dawn broke, the officer woke to a warm weight pressed gently against his hand. The dog had moved closer during the night, trusting him completely. And in that still, golden morning, the officer realized this wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something he didn't know he'd been missing. The next morning began quietly, sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor while the officer prepared breakfast. The dog, still unsure but noticeably calmer, followed him with slow, careful steps. Every sound in the home was new, yet he stayed close, tail low but hopeful. The officer smiled at the small progress, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. But just as he placed a bowl of food down, the dog froze, ears high, body stiff, eyes locked on the front door. A low, uneasy rumble grew in his chest. The officer frowned. Hey, what is it? He stepped toward the door, expecting maybe a delivery truck or a stray cat outside. But the dog blocked him, pressing his body firmly against the officer's legs. When the officer gently pushed past, the dog circled back, whining sharply, tail tucked tight. It was an urgency the officer didn't recognize yet. Not fear, not aggression, something deeper, instinctive. He cracked the door open just an inch and saw nothing unusual. A quiet street. Morning air. The distant sound of kids heading to school. "See," he murmured, trying to reassure the dog. "Nothing's wrong." But the dog didn't relax. His paws paced in tight, anxious lines. Every few seconds he glanced back at the officer, then at the door again, letting out a soft, frustrated bark as if trying to communicate something the officer simply wasn't understanding. "Buddy, you're safe," the officer said with a gentle sigh, brushing his hand through the dog's fur. "I promise." But as the day went on, the dog repeated the behavior, growling softly at empty corners, standing guard by windows, refusing to let the officer walk out without him. And each time, the officer dismissed it as leftover fear, maybe old habits from surviving on his own. What he didn't know was that the dog wasn't reacting to memories. He was reacting to something real, something close. And the warnings would only get stronger from here. The evening settled slowly, painting the house in soft amber light. The officer stood at the kitchen counter, trying to unwind from a long shift. His shoulders ached. His mind felt heavy. The day's calls stayed with him longer than usual, voices, places, moments he couldn't quite shake off. He rubbed his forehead and exhaled. The dog watched him from across the room. Quiet. Still. Head tilted. Ears halfway raised, reading him the way only a dog could. The officer didn't notice at first. He was too wrapped in his own exhaustion. But when he finally looked up, he saw the dog sitting there, almost like he'd been waiting for the officer to see him. "Hey, buddy." The dog took a slow step forward. Then another. His tail lifted just an inch, hopeful, careful, gentle. The officer sank onto the couch, leaning back with a tired breath. The dog hesitated at the edge of the room, one paw half lifted, checking the officer's mood, checking the air, checking something deeper, something emotional. "It's been a long day," the officer murmured. Something softened in the dog's expression. He approached quietly, slowly, paws barely making a sound on the floor. He stopped right in front of the officer and lifted his nose, breath warm against the officer's hand. A small pause. A soft moment. Then the dog made a decision, a brave one. He climbed gently onto the couch, placing himself right beside the officer, his shoulder pressing into the man's side. No demand. No push. Just presence. The officer blinked, surprised. "You're getting bold," he whispered. The dog lowered his head onto the officer's thigh, and just stayed there. Minutes passed. Then more. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the dog's slow breathing. The officer rested a hand on the dog's back and felt the warmth under his palm, the steady rise and fall of a calm body, the soft rhythm of trust forming. He hadn't felt this kind of peace in a long time. Not at work. Not at home. Not even with people. But this dog, this quiet, watchful, intuitive dog, seemed to understand something no one else did. Not with words. Not with explanations. Just with presence. The officer whispered into the stillness. "You know, I wasn't planning on keeping you." The dog didn't move. Didn't lift his head. Didn't tense or shrink back. He simply listened, breathing gently against the officer's leg. "But now," the officer paused, rubbing the dog's ear. "I don't know. Feels like you've been here longer than a couple of days." The dog's tail thumped once. Just once. Small. Soft. But full. The officer laughed under his breath. "Yeah, I guess you're staying." Another tail thump. A deeper breath from the dog. A quiet acceptance from both of them. Later that night, the officer got up to grab a glass of water. As soon as he moved, the dog lifted his head, alert but calm. He followed the officer into the kitchen, watching his steps, keeping close but not crowding. When the officer leaned against the counter, rubbing the tension from his neck, the dog stepped closer and nudged his arm. A small nudge, barely there, but intentional. "You're something else," the officer sighed, smiling softly. The dog nudged again, then settled at the officer's feet, lying down with a long, relaxed exhale, the kind dogs only give when they finally feel safe. The officer looked down at him for a long moment, something unspoken moving in his chest. Not pity, not obligation, not just kindness. Something deeper, something mutual. A connection forming not because they needed each other but because they recognized each other. Two souls a little bruised, a little guarded, finding quiet healing in shared space. When they moved to the bedroom later, the officer pointed toward a soft blanket on the floor. "That's for you," he said gently. "I mean, I don't want to spoil you too fast." The dog sat beside the bed instead, tail sweeping the carpet once, asking. The officer sighed, amused. "You're really testing boundaries, aren't you?" The dog lifted one paw and placed it on the edge of the mattress. Slow, respectful, hopeful. The officer looked at him. The dog held his gaze, ears slightly back, eyes soft, a small plea in his posture. "Fine," the officer whispered. "But just tonight." The dog climbed up carefully, as if afraid to disturb anything. He curled beside the officer's feet, tucking his nose under his tail. The officer lay back, staring at the ceiling. Something felt different, calmer, lighter, as if a weight he'd been carrying alone had shifted even just a little. He looked down at the dog. The dog opened one eye. The officer smiled. "Thanks for being here." The dog's tail tapped once against the blanket. And for the first time in a long while, the officer fell asleep easily, breathing slow, breathing steady, while the dog kept a quiet, peaceful watch at his side. A healing connection had begun. Strong, gentle, real. Morning light slipped through the blinds in thin, soft lines. The house was still, quiet, warm. The officer woke slowly, blinking against the pale glow, feeling a kind of rest he hadn't felt in years. Then he felt it. A gentle weight at his feet. A steady warmth. Soft breathing. He looked down. The dog lifted his head, eyes half sleepy, ears loosening as if relieved the officer was finally awake. "Morning," the officer whispered. The dog stretched, long, slow, back arching, then settled again with his chin resting on the officer's ankle. Not claiming, not demanding, just belonging. The officer lay there for a moment, letting the feeling sink in. Belonging. It had been a long time since his home felt like that. When he finally got up, the dog followed him, close but respectful, matching the officer's pace, checking his mood, glancing up every few steps as if measuring the day. In the kitchen, while the officer poured coffee, the dog sat by the doorway with a quiet, patient posture. Tail curled gently around his paws. Eyes soft, ears alert, as though waiting for a signal he couldn't yet name. The officer sipped his coffee and leaned against the counter. He studied the dog for a long moment. "You're making this harder, you know." The dog's ears perked. The officer looked away, exhaling slowly. "I mean, I was supposed to take you back today. That was the plan." The dog didn't move, but something in his body changed. A slight tension in the shoulders. A tiny adjustment in his posture. A pause in his breathing. The officer noticed. He set his mug down. "Hey, it's okay. I didn't say I was going to." A beat. A softer tone. "I'm just thinking." The dog lowered his head, as if waiting for judgment. The officer crouched beside him and gently touched his cheek. "You really don't want to go back there, do you?" The dog leaned into his hand. Just a little. Then he closed his eyes. That was his answer. Later that afternoon, the officer got ready for a shift. He grabbed his uniform shirt, clipped his badge, adjusted his belt. The familiar weight returned. A reminder of responsibility, stress, long nights. The dog watched him silently from the hallway. Not anxious, not whining, just watching. When the officer sat to lace his boots, the dog walked forward and placed one paw on the officer's knee. A soft touch. Careful. Purposeful. The officer paused. "You don't want me to go?" The dog held his gaze. Still. Steady. Heart in his eyes. The officer swallowed. "I have to. I'll be back." The dog lowered his paw but stayed close, only stepping back when the officer stood. When the officer opened the door, the dog didn't bolt, didn't wander. He simply sat straight-backed, ears tilted, waiting for reassurance. The officer knelt and put both hands on the dog's shoulders. "I'll be home tonight," he said quietly. "I promise." The dog pressed his forehead lightly against the officer's chest, a gesture that said more than words could. The officer left with something tightening in his chest. Work dragged on longer than expected. Calls, reports, meetings. But even through the chaos, the officer found himself thinking about the dog, about the way he listened, the way he watched, the way he anchored the house with quiet presence. By the time he returned home, the sky was dark, rain tapping softly on the pavement. He opened the door. The dog was there immediately, but not wildly, not jumping, not barking. He approached slowly, tail low, eyes bright, ears forward, as if saying, "You came back. Thank you for coming back." The officer knelt and let the dog press into him, feeling the warmth of his fur, the relief in his breath. "I missed you too," he whispered. Later that night, the officer sat on the couch with adoption papers in his hands. The shelter had given them to him, just in case. He hadn't planned to look at them so soon. The dog lay on the floor nearby, head resting on his paws, watching with quiet anticipation, almost reading the officer's heartbeat more than his expression. The officer stared at the papers, then at the dog, then back at the papers. "This is a big step," he murmured. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" The dog stood, walked to the couch, placed his chin gently on the officer's knee, like a soft yes. The officer let out a slow, shaky breath. "Yeah, I guess I am too." He signed the first line. The dog's tail swept the floor. He signed the second line. The dog lifted his head, ears perked. He signed the final signature. The dog exhaled deeply and laid his head fully on the officer's lap, body melting with relief. The officer stroked his back with a trembling smile. "That's it," he whispered. "You're mine now." A pause. "And I'm yours." The dog closed his eyes. Safe. Home. Finally chosen. The house felt different. Warmer. Alive. Peaceful. An adoption decision had been made. Not out of impulse. Not out of pity. But out of an undeniable bond that had grown quietly, steadily, beautifully. A bond that would only deepen from here. Morning arrived gently, as if the world itself understood something new had begun. Soft sunlight brushed across the living room floor. Dust floated like tiny stars. The house felt different now, warmer, fuller, alive with the quiet kind of joy that didn't need noise to be felt. The officer stepped out of his bedroom, still half tired, still adjusting to the idea of sharing his space with another soul. He stretched, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The dog was waiting for him. Not anxiously, not demanding, just sitting there calm, patient, glowing with a sense of belonging he'd never had before. The officer smiled softly. "Hey, partner." The dog's tail wagged once, then twice, slow, steady, full of meaning. A new beginning. The day unfolded gently. The officer cooked breakfast, scrambled eggs, coffee, toast. The dog stayed close by, lying just outside the kitchen, nose lifting toward the warm smells but never begging. Just observing. Just existing beside him. Felt right. When the officer set a small bowl of plain cooked chicken on the floor, the dog approached with a cautious gratitude, watching the officer's face before taking the first bite. "You don't have to check with me every time," the officer chuckled. "You're allowed to be happy." The dog ate slowly, tail sweeping the floor in soft, grateful arcs. Later, the officer clipped on a leash, a new one he'd bought the night before. Navy blue. Strong. Clean. A real symbol of belonging. "Ready for your first walk?" he asked. The dog's ears shot up. Not frantic. Not wild. Just hopeful. They stepped outside together. The street was quiet, morning breeze, distant traffic hum, a few neighbors sweeping porches or starting their cars. The dog walked beside the officer with surprising ease, matching his pace, pausing when he paused, moving when he moved. Like he'd been practicing for this moment all his life. The officer watched him, impressed. "Look at you," he murmured. "Like you've done this 1,000 times." The dog lifted his head proudly, chest rising with a confidence the officer hadn't seen before. They passed a few houses, a jogger, a couple walking their own dog, and with every minute the dog grew more relaxed, ears bouncing, tail swinging, eyes bright. For the first time he walked not as a stray, not as a shelter pup, but as someone's dog, as his dog. Halfway down the block, the officer paused at a small park. Trees shivered softly in the winter wind. Leaves rustled across the ground. The dog sniffed the air, then sat beside the officer, leaning his shoulder gently into the man's leg. The officer placed a hand on his head. "Feels different today," he whispered. The dog closed his eyes at the touch. The officer continued, voice quiet but steady. "I've felt alone for a long time. Didn't realize how heavy that was until you showed up." A long pause. A breath shared between them. "You gave me something back," he said. "Something I didn't know I'd lost." The dog pressed closer, chest rising with a deep, content exhale. A silent reply. A promise of loyalty. A bond deepening with each heartbeat. When they returned home, the dog explored the house as if seeing it for the first time, with confidence now, not caution. He sniffed the living room, patted down the hall, peeked into the bedroom, circled twice on his blanket, then looked up at the officer as if asking, "Is this really mine?" The officer nodded gently. "Every corner, every room. This is your home now." The dog wagged his tail in a slow sweeping rhythm, joy, relief, wonder, all wrapped into one simple movement. As afternoon settled in, the officer sat on the couch with a stack of forms for work. The dog hopped up beside him, curling gently at his side, head resting against the officer's leg. The officer smiled. "You're getting comfortable with this whole family thing, huh?" The dog's tail tapped once. The officer set his papers aside. Then he reached down, running his fingers through soft fur. "You know, I've seen a lot on this job. Hard things, sad things, things that make you question the world a little." A breath. "But you reminded me they're still good. Still softness." The dog lifted his head and nudged the officer's hand, asking for more. The officer laughed quietly. "Yeah, all right. Come here." The dog climbed halfway into his lap, curling gently, tucking his nose against the officer's chest. A moment of stillness. A moment of pure, simple healing. That evening, the sky outside shifted into shades of gold and lavender. The officer opened the back door to let the cool air drift in. The dog stepped out onto the porch, sniffing the world like it was brand new. The officer leaned against the doorframe, watching him, watching how freely he moved now, how confident his steps had become, how bright his eyes looked in the fading light. "New beginnings," the officer whispered. The dog turned toward him, ears up, tail lifted, a gentle spark in his expression. He walked back inside and sat in front of the officer, calm, grateful. "Home." The officer knelt, placing both hands on the dog's face. "We're in this together now," he said softly. "Whatever comes next, we face it side by side." The dog leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently into the officer's chest. A gesture of unity, of trust, of a bond sealed without words. The officer closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of that connection flow through him. Then they stood together, in a quiet house, in a peaceful moment, in the first day of a life they hadn't expected but were so ready for. A new beginning, gentle, healing, and beautifully theirs.